My name is Eileen Pollis. I'm a librarian at Long Beach Public Library. I'm recording today an oral history, which is a combination, of course, of oral and video. And it is Tuesday, August 10th, and it's around 1:09 p.m. Today, we are speaking to Mr. Dennis Carey, and he is our special guest. Welcome, Mr. Carey. I'm glad to have you here with us today at the library.
Okay, well, thank you, Eileen. It's great to be here and try to do this. The first slide you see is a receipt for the purchase of the lot of 103 Wisconsin Street in March of 1921. So my family has just passed the 100th anniversary of owning this property, and which is all due to the efforts of my maternal grand aunt, Catherine A. Hurley. Catherine was about 4 years old when her family immigrated from Ireland, the western part of County Cork near the sea. And the whole family invested in her, more or less, and she became a school teacher and graduated from what became Hunter College in 1904. It was called Normal School. And she used to walk to school from the mid-30s in Manhattan with President Hunter. And so she knew him very well. She taught, for the most part, in Borough Park, at, I think it was PS 164. And that is interesting in relationship to Long Beach, because Borough Park was developed by William H. Reynolds, the founder of Long Beach. So that's her graduation picture of Catherine Hurley in 1904.
That's incredible. And it's, I mean, not only at that age that she was the younger sibling, correct?
That's correct. And
she finished school, she became a teacher, and came to Long Beach and acquired property at a young age. That is very interesting.
Many of her sibs, and when I was very young, my Aunt Catherine, my Aunt Lizzie, my Aunt Mary, and her brother John, or Uncle Jack, my mother's uncle, they all lived with us in the bungalow, and there was not a lot of sleeping space. And I think that's the way, as I go along, I'll talk about how this became the gathering place for the family, starting in the summer of 1922.
That's amazing too, that, it's over 100 years. You think about 100 years, you say, nah, but wow. So it's incredible to be able to have that experience in your lifetime, and you witnessed it, and you're here to share it with us today. I like this picture. I always see this picture, and you know that it's the People's Church, but in the background, you don't know, but you see your house, right?
That's correct. This photo, which you see the People's Church, was probably taken from the upper floor or the roof of the West End Club, which was on Arizona Avenue. And what you see in the foreground is the kind of picnic area for the West End Club. And you can see mentioned about blankets, hot dogs, and cold drinks. If you look at the big part of the picture, basically the streets in the West End in 1922 were still unpaved, and they remained that way for a couple of more years. If you follow the line of telephone poles to the end, it doesn't go very far. That's probably about Tennessee or Minnesota. My mother always said, and she had a great memory, that the bay dipped southward towards the sea at Minnesota and almost to Beach Street. And there was basically only a strand connecting to Atlantic Beach, which was not developed, and to the most part, but the Lawrence Beach Club was already there at that time. If you look at the closest telephone pole, a pole by the West End Club, and you follow it almost to the top, the third house from the left is 103 Wisconsin, just like it looked for many years up until the 1950s. That house came to Long Beach in two sections. My mother swears it was not floated in like many of the houses that came to the West End. It did come by truck. I don't know how they got it from Grand Avenue, where the pavement ended, to Wisconsin Street. But my great uncle, Jack McCarthy, he somehow obtained the house from a paymaster's office in East New York where he worked. And it came in on trucks in 2 sections, was put together there probably in 1922. Well, it was there by the summer of 22. This picture was 22-ish or 23. And then, you know, a porch was added to the back and to the front, pretty much. And I'm, you know, talking here from the living room of that house.
That's incredible. And we talked about John Hurley right now, right? This is your grand uncle?
Grand uncle, John Hurley. There's a little storeroom next to where I am now, where supposedly is his smoking room. He liked Prince Albert tobacco. And as the next slide shows, he worked in the spirits industry. And this note or letter from May of 1919 is his sort of a recommendation, as he was separated from Karen and Dunn rye whiskeys because Prohibition had just come in and they could not make whiskey, at least legally. My mother said he was sought after by the rum runners and bootleggers because of his knowledge, but that he was a very pious, saintly man and did not get himself involved. At least that's what I've been led to believe.
I'd say he looked like a really stand-up chap. He did. He looked so great in that. I love that photo. Thank you. That's a great photo, by the way.
And this is an interesting photo. It shows on the left my Catherine Hurley, who was the leader of the gang for this house, my grandfather in the center, Jeremiah McCarthy, and my grandmother, Irene McCarthy. One story about Irene McCarthy is that her real name was Bridget, and I didn't know that till very late in my mother's life, but she was so enamored by Irene Castle, the great ballroom dancer who is part of the Long Beach story, that she changed her name. Apparently Bridget was a little too Irish, like Patty, for some of the women coming over. You know, it's sort of an interesting thing. Of course, they're wearing the interesting garb of the bathers back in the day. I think this may not have been taken in Long Beach, and it may have been a little bit before the 1920s, because by the mid 20s, the bathing gear was changing. Pretty conservative by today's mores or culture and style.
Yes. And we've seen a lot of those little articles in the newspaper where the indecent exposure tickets were being given out on our beach.
Yeah, the 3-inch rule and then the 6-inch rule.
It's amazing, right?
And the men had to have tops, so they got a ticket.
That's a great photo. Was this a glass slide or was this an actual picture?
This is an actual picture. Unfortunately, you can see there's a rip through it, but it was pasted together.
It's still good. It's cherished memories.
My grandmother and her sister look somewhat similar, but I think they hand around one of the women makes, I think, it more intimate that was my grandmother. Now, the next couple of slides are interesting historically, because this one is a note from the Village of Long Beach Water Department from June of 1921, showing the connection of the water to the 103 lot. And the next slide.
Is this the one from Point Lookout? Let's see, by date, June of 21.
June of 21, payment of interest on the purchase of Catherine Hurley. And realty was the Walsh Farrell Realty. Apparently the owner was the Lookout Point company, which is probably one of Reynolds' companies. I think they went by different names, but this is interesting that it was the Lookout Point company.
Right. Let me go to your next slide. Walsh Farrell.
Yeah, Walsh Farrell. This is for the survey of the lot in October of 21. And the next slide shows the Long Beach Lumber Company. which says at the bay, Magnolia. So it may have been where the wreck is rather than where Whitbread's is, although you can imagine Long Beach Lumber Company could have evolved into
Right.
Whitbread's. I don't know if you know that.
Yes, actually, Mrs. with Joan Whitbread said that her father originally was on the bay. And the change in name is because that's their name. So it was originally the Long Beach Lumber Company, and they did move when they lost the properties. Well, they didn't lose the property. They moved their property, and actually the building that they're in now, they actually moved it from the bay over to where it is now. So that's an original part of their building, and it dates back to 1925.
Mm.
So they have a very interesting story. I'm trying to get them to talk on my program.
Sure. So my mother had these photos taken in the 1920s, and of course they're incredibly precious. This shows part of the family sitting on the bay in summer of 1922, when my mother was almost 4 years of age. My mother spent every summer of her life here. In 1998, she moved into this bungalow, as she called it, in full time. It was heating had gone in a few years before, and she actually passed away in 2010 at I guess it was 92 years of age, and the place she loved. This photo showed family members who gathered here all the time. This is at the foot of Wisconsin Street on the bay. You can see, a bay house very clearly there. My mother is the little girl, and the man is her Uncle Mike, and behind her is her Aunt Nora. They were a couple, and a couple of cousins.
That's amazing. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful pictures.
And this photo shows a bay house very nicely. These photo was taken in a boat that was owned by Percy Williams, who lived slightly down the block on Wisconsin Street. I think Percy was in the show business to some extent, and he was a great talker. I shouldn't say this, but we used to talk about being buttonholed or by Mr. Williams, and he just would go on and on and on. I wish I listened better than I did, perhaps as a kid or a teenager, but we used to call the verb, you got persified when you walked down Wisconsin Street. But he was a great man, full of life and full of energy. But this is my mother again, the little girl, and the little boy is her Charlie McCarthy, and he is right in front of Catherine Hurley, and the rest are cousins or aunts there.
This is treasure, I mean, true. And your story is true, because when you're young, you don't want to sit and listen to all the stories. You say, but I heard that story already, Mom, and you want to run away. But then you think about it as like, wow, what did I miss?
Well, I have 10 hours of audio tape of my mother telling the family stories. And actually, you wind her up and she talked, but sometimes I hated when I interrupted her because she was supposed to say something that was lost.
Well, hopefully not. And you have it. You should, you know what you have to do. Digitize it and.
Oh, it's all done.
I
even have a book for my family. It's not published, but I combined all her stories.
Beautiful.
And this is another view, the same bay house, and that's my Uncle Charlie in 1923 or 1922, not sure which one. And this, I'm just looking at some notes here, but I show in this picture because Mary Rourke is, of the three taller girls, is in the middle, and Mary Rourke became Mary Farrell. And why is this important? Because in 1924 or so, the West End Club had the Labor Day, the junior girls 50-yard dash. And my mother, Geraldine McCarthy, came in third, got the bronze medal. Her friend Bessie Hunt got the gold medal. And then a girl who was 1 year younger came in second. And that was Mary Rourke. And Mary Mary Rourke's two sons went to the same high school as I, Archbishop High School. We all ran track. I was okay, but Tom Farrell won the bronze medal in the 1968 Mexico Olympics in the 800 meters, and his brother Peter had set a national record as a high schooler and collegiate at Notre Dame. So it made sense that Mary Rourke beat my mother in the girls 50-yard dash when they were 7 and 8 years of age.
And they all started in Long Beach.
They had started in Long Beach. This is Delaware Avenue that this picture was taken on, I believe.
Right.
Beautiful shot of the bungalows and the urns there.
It's gorgeous.
Now, this is a cousin of my aunt, Catherine. And once again, it's on the bay. And that brought up some stories about the bay. And one of my Uncle Bob's friends, Parnell Callahan, had a house on the bay, a pier with a pier, and his father taught the West End kids how to swim, which, you know, they all learned eventually. Parnell Callahan was the captain of the Cornell, not the Cornell, but the Columbia University swim team. And, actually, you can almost Google his name for some of his events, but everybody swam at the bay, learned to swim at the bay. My Uncle Bob told a great story that he lost his car keys to a jalopy he had and in the water. And he dove off the pier again and went back after he couldn't get the car started and dove down, held his breath because he was so well trained, and found the car keys. And he always loved telling that story. In addition to swimming in the bay, they would go to the Olympia Pool. The Olympia Pool existed in the 1920s up to mid-30s or so at the boardwalk in Wendell. A lot of people don't know about the Olympia Pool. They know about the Lafayette Municipal Pool and the Rec Pool now. But this was very, very important part of Long Beach history because Eleanor Holmes did some of her training there. Eleanor Holmes was a gold medal winner in the backstroke, and I think it was 1928 Olympics. She's famous for being thrown off the team in 1936 for sipping champagne on the transatlantic journey to the Berlin Olympics. She's also famous because she was a beautiful woman, was in the movies, married famous impresario named Rose, blocking his first name. And of course, Johnny Weissmuller swam there as well. And those were all heroes to my mom and
Yes.
to me, actually, growing up.
Now you see how it's so interesting. She's sitting, she's standing in the bay water and it's not that deep. So at low tide, this is pretty, that's pretty low.
That's right. That's right.
Very low.
And you can see also the garb then.
Yes.
Now this photo is, I believe, my Aunt Kathleen McCarthy. You notice the kit-cloth chairs that were pretty popular up until modern times. And we had a number of these that were underneath the bungalow. We have a small crawl space there, and I remember seeing them as a kid. In 1923 and 1924, about the time my mother was supposed to go into kindergarten, my grandfather, who was a Boilermaker, was converting the house in Bay Ridge from coal to oil. And so my grandmother with the 4 young kids stayed in the bungalow past Labor Day, which obviously was not usually the case. So my Uncle Charlie went to the school on Magnolia Avenue, which was the school. Later became the high school, and et cetera, et cetera. And my mom, they turned her away because she hadn't been vaccinated yet. And in any case, Charlie went to school. They stayed until November, but when the wind started blowing up through the floorboards from the crawl space and lifted the rugs into the air, my grandmother packed up and returned to Bay Ridge. So that until 1998, when my mother moved in after my father passed, that was the main summer. Not that we didn't come here and freeze a bit every once in a while in fall and the spring.
Right.
My dad joined the Klan in 1943. He was dating my mother in 1941 and before. This is him sitting on one of the wooden jetties probably around Tennessee Avenue. And shortly after this, he may have already been in the Army, joined the Army Air Corps. He was B-17 navigator. He was shot down over Germany, survived, and was in POW camp for a free vacation for 6 months.
Oh my goodness. That's incredible.
These are my 2 aunts and my mother on the beach, probably around near Tennessee. This was 1941. My Aunt Kathleen is on the left, my Aunt Ellen on the right, my mom in the center. Kathleen dated a fellow named Ed Steffen, who I don't know, but Paul Jackson's book on the 30s and 40s of Long Beach mentions Ed several times. He lived on Beach Street, at least for a while, over one of the small businesses that we had there. Ellen met her future husband, John McCrone, whose sister was living in 101 Wisconsin Street for a number of years, and Josephine Kaufman. And so he met her, supposedly scrubbing the floors, or one of them scrubbing the floors of the bungalow, and fell in love.
Well, that's great. Ed Steffen, he was on the Long Beach Patrol, because I've seen pictures of him.
Sure, yeah.
I've seen pictures of him in the history.
Yeah, his name is mentioned many times along the way.
Yeah.
Now, this is my Uncle Robert, or Bobby McCarthy. There's a lot of little stories about him. And the first is in 1922, as a 2-year-old, he was runner-up to the Waldron twins in the first Labor Day baby contest. I'm sure the Waldron twins cute, but look at the cheeks of my uncle. And the Waldron twins, father Frank Waldron was a city councilman, and I think the fist was it.
Yeah.
At least I'm joking. The other thing, he had a clamming business, and for a penny a clam, he and his friend Morrison would go over to the bay, go to the marshes, collect the clams. And her friend Morrison, well, his real name is Morrison Splain, but he's known in the world as Mickey Splain, the famous Pulp Fiction author. And Mickey was the nephew of Agnes and Bill Turk, who lived up on Wisconsin Street. He was good friends with everybody here at that time. He was telling stories long before he became famous. My mother tells of his ghost stories. If there was an open lot, the bay, the beach, they would have a fire, and he would hold forth and scare them to death half the time with his stories. Some of the people who were there were obviously my mom and her sibs, the Dooleys, who lived down the block, Midge, Kathleen, Rosemary, Jeannie, Doris, and Joe Dooley, Jackie Schwab, who became a Long Beach cop, I believe, Mary Williams, Jean Bridgman, and Bessie Hunt, the winner of the Girls 50-yard dash that I mentioned before. Uncle Bobby delivered Western Union telegrams from Lido to Atlantic Beach, which they always refer to as Sheer Beach, each Atlantic Beach as Sheer Beach. He played volleyball on the beach. The volleyball nets were under the house when I was a young child. He once rode his bicycle from Bay Ridge to Long Beach. As you can see, he was in the US Navy. That was in World War II. He delivered on tankers, oil, and airplanes to Europe. And he was discharged in 1945 from the Lido Hotel when it was a Navy disembarkation center.
Wow. That's incredible. He's got some history too.
Yes, absolutely. Well, this is a cute picture of my beautiful mom and my cute sister, Gerry Ann, who was born in 44. This is probably, she was old enough for this to be December of 44. You can see some wreckage behind the fence. They would usually sit, between Virginia and Tennessee on the beach.
That's beautiful. She's got a beautiful smile. Look at that.
And this is in the kitchen in the bungalow, 1945-ish. You can see the sliding window. Gerry Ann is being bathed, and I don't even know if they had a regular sink in the kitchen back then. You can see the bread box on the counter. I still have that bread box, not using it, but it's such an antique, I will never get rid of it. And the stand, the wrought iron stand on which the tub is sitting, I also have that, and it's sitting right next to me right now.
That's cool.
This is Jeremiah McCarthy, my grandfather. This photo was taken in summer 1947. I was born in October. At that time, there was still sand all around the house. You can clearly see the porch. You can see the little garden, and, you know, and the house next door, 106, that's 105 rather, Wisconsin, is where is owned by one of my nephews at the moment, and I'll get to that a little bit later. I'm probably in this picture if it's the summer of 1947, but you can't see me. Mom looked pretty good for about 7 months pregnant. You can see the bungalow pretty much the same from the time it was seen in the 1922 picture to the time I was born.
She's a beautiful woman. Let's see.
This is a photo of my folks, and one reason for including this, I think, Eileen, is that on Wisconsin Street, the cars are parked on the east side, and here in this photo, which is not reversed, they parked on the west side. So for some year or some time, the cars, and you can see how old these cars are. The house across the street, owned by my porch, was owned by the Schwabs, the aforementioned Jackie Schwab. This is a great photo for many reasons. Look at all the fish they caught at that time. I think there may have even been some kingfish or some weakfish in there, which are, you know, fairly rare. That's my dad on the right. On the left is Joe Dooley. I mentioned some of his family. He and his wife Josephine lived down the block, 5 or 6 houses. He's the grandfather of my good friend Bobby Grote and his siblings. And the house that with the brick is the Turk's house, Mickey Splain, where Mickey Splain summered with his parents. And all the way down on the right, you can see a white house that's on the bay, set back a bit. Some of the other people who lived on Long Beach during that time were the Josephsons, the Careys, the Omarks, Goldschmidts, Malones. And for a period of time, a fellow named Jim McMullen and his brother Ed and his parents lived on. Jim McMullen, like Ed Lauder, went to Hollywood and had some, he's not that well known, but he was in a lot of interesting films and TV shows, including Ben Casey. He was a neurosurgeon. Beautiful. And I inherited a lot of his sporting goods from his parents.
Oh, wow.
Now, my sister probably not happy showing this picture of her, but this picture is taken just off the beach on Virginia Avenue. Okay, so this would be on the western side of Virginia Avenue. There's obviously no houses there. And I vaguely remember going to the beach and not sitting on the other side of the fence or the bulkhead, and because the tide would come up all the way to the back of the beach at times during the early 50s. And it's not so clear in my mind, but I do remember it. And this picture shows that they were not sitting on the beach, and I remember that as well. This is a little bit later, probably 1952. That's my mom with my older sister Gerry Ann, and probably my brother Bill rather than me at that time. It's interesting because you can see houses on Wyoming Avenue. And right on the far left is the lifeguard or the first aid shack that was at the foot of Wisconsin Street. Barefoot boy with cheek of tans. This is myself, shoeless, sitting on the fence in 1952. I may have not mentioned, but that we had Rosa Sharon petunias and violets growing in the sand. If you can remember, we also had honeysuckle on the side of the house. I used to love smelling the honeysuckle and actually sucking on the nectar. And it was great times growing up in the West End.
It's beautiful.
Now this photo is a little bit later. There's now 4 of us. I'm on the left, Bill's on the right, Gerry Ann holding Virginia, who's obviously newborn. She was born in May of 1954. The house to the left is 101 Wisconsin, which was owned by the Kaufmans. Bill Murdy owned at one time. You may know Murdy Electricians, his son in town. And then the Murtaughs, and Frank Murtaugh is, you may see him riding along the boardwalk or town in his motorized wheelchair. But he grew up his first years there before his parents moved over to Delaware Avenue. So one of the great things about coming to Long Beach was going to summer school. That's what we call the West School Long Beach recreation programs during the summer. We would walk over to Maryland Avenue. I think it was always in the mornings, and that's where we would spend our mornings many times. They had all kinds of interesting events. This one, where we were dressed up for a costume contest, I believe. No fancy contest then, ragamuffins. I think Billy has a paintbrush in his hand. I don't know what I'm doing. The little blonde girl, second from the left, is Patty Murtaugh, Frank Murtaugh's brother, who lived at 101 Wisconsin. The other things we did at West School, I actually won a trophy for square dancing as a teeny little kid, I suppose. They would take us to the Lafayette pool. Eventually we started walking there. I love going to the pool, smelling the chlorine, going on the diving board, getting mustard covered pretzels at the concession stand. I can't believe I did that, but somebody was good. Probably my best friend at the time, Stephen Horowitz, who lived on Virginia. I learned a lot of Yiddish from Stephen and his family. But the best thing was his mother would put away cucumbers on the back porch when they left to go home in September. And we had great kosher dills when we came back the next year, in addition to the noodle kugel. When I got a little bit older, we played softball. I was pretty terrible, but there was a good ball players, including Peter Farrell, who I got to know later, but didn't know his cousin, Paul Buckley. There was a guy named Jeff Schwab who could almost hit the school with a softball.
Wow.
We went on rides to Yankee Stadium to see Yankee games. I didn't know him, but I bet Billy Crystal, who's my age, was probably on the same bus with the East End kids because we all went together, saying 99 bottles of beer on the wall all the way back. And the other thing that we did in the summer besides the rec was we swam. We swam at the bay where Tennessee or even Minnesota avenues, where there was a sand and no bulkhead. And people put in, there were rafts there at some times, there were ladders to climb up and dive off of. And that's really where I learned to swim. And it was a lot of fun. We always went there at high tide. And then we went to the ocean when we weren't at the bay. Now this is, you can see we stayed in Wisconsin, so we were always pretty much going to the beach down Virginia Avenue. This is 1955. It's interesting because in the background, you can see a place called the Sandbar Inn, which also became the Sea Spa Inn. That isn't the place where the beach house, which was there in the 60s and 70s, was located. Tom Everett, Deacon Tom Everett's grandfather, Jules Everett, purchased it in the early 50s I do remember going underneath. It was raised up, and you could go underneath and look for change that had fallen through the floorboard, and watch out for glass and nails. But we weren't supposed to be in there, but we were in there, as were many other children. It was raised, taken down in 1959, and replaced by the beach house. My dad played the fiddle. Here's the fiddler on the roof on 103 Wisconsin Street, about 1955. You can see that the house has been remodeled to some extent with redwood stained wood, jalousie windows. You can see the Rose of Sharon peeking over the fence. But my dad played the fiddle for birthday parties. Sadly, although he was pretty talented, there's no recording of him playing the fiddle, whereas now everybody records everything.
Okay.
1962, this is probably about the same spot as those 1922 photos that I showed earlier in the presentation. That's me as a 15-year-old standing to the right. My sister is on the far left, some of our college friends, and the woman with the sunglasses is Ruth White, who lived 2 houses over in that white house I pointed out before on the bay. And this was the property of the Weisses. Michelle Weiss was a good friend of my sister, and they let us, once they closed off the Tennessee and the bay, we did go swimming here because we knew people who lived on the bay. So the handsome guy in this photo is me on Grand Boulevard in 1967. You can see the Long Beach Catholic School and St. Ignatius, part of it in the background. No condos at that time. There was a secret pass where the nuns would come on the beach, and sometimes they did close off the beach so they could bathe privately. There's a famous story I won't go into of one nun having to be rescued, and when I worked on that beach with Charlie Spindell and Rick Barry, and I think I was off the day that they were worried they would have to give resuscitation to one of the nuns from the school.
I see you're wearing your Long Beach lifeguard shirt.
Yes, so I was a Long Beach lifeguard. This was my second year on the beach. I started in 1966, worked 7 years. I worked Tennessee, I worked then Grand, Laurelton, Maryland, Wyoming, and then finished up on Arizona my last 2 years as I had to become an intern, having finished medical school. I couldn't get off for that next summer. Last summer, I worked with my brother and the aforementioned Bobby Robert Groth, who still lives in Long Beach on Delaware and Ocean View area. Our captains during that time were Carl Saviola and then Jack Murphy. The chiefs were Gene Carbona, who I saw the other night at the lifeguard reunion, and Ronnie Quinn. As far as working in Long Beach, I was a beachcomber from 62 to 63. I guess I'm 1 year short of a pension. But my sister worked at Hiddleman's Bakery in the center of town, brought home jelly donuts. I learned about rugula. And Virginia taught, my sister Virginia taught at West School for many years. She was a reading teacher. Billy was a beachcomber and a lifeguard. Tom parked cars at Capri and was a busboy at various restaurants around town. And Irene actually worked for Jack Murphy when they were developing the special school at the Nike site up in Lido. And so there was a lot of, even though we were summer people for most of the time, there was, you know, we worked in Long Beach and knew Long Beach pretty well. So 1964, I began surfing. This is a photo from 68 with some upgraded surfboards. My Hobie Nose Rider, my brother's Challenger surfboard. You can probably see the Drifty in the background, or Camp Victor on the right side. This was once again on Wyoming Avenue Beach. The Beach Boys got me going in 1962, but finally we had enough money to buy a surfboard in 1964, which I bought from Butch Petrie for $80. Butch was the son of Arthur Petrie, who ran the West End Petrie Meat Market. No relationship to the realty that I know of. And so, I'm still surfing. I still go out, every once in a while. It led me to California for a while, but I came back. This is a neat picture of multi-generations, as you mentioned. If you allow me to go through it, my father had a stroke in 1979, and he's in the wheelchair. My mother is standing next to him. My siblings, who are twins, Tom in the center on the wall, and Irene on the right of the picture. They both own houses, one house apart on West Hudson Street. My niece, Megan Kavanaugh, is on the wall too, and my niece, Trisha Kavanaugh, is looking away in the stroller. But very interesting, I mentioned that my father was a POW. The man on the wall in the red shirt is Bob Meyer, the co-pilot from the B-17 that was shot down in Thanksgiving week in 1944. His wife, Pearl, who is still alive in Wisconsin, is one of, they're like my other family. This is their second trip, I believe, to Long Beach. In 1953, they came the first time. And I was so in awe of the Myers that the first time I ever traveled west of New Jersey, I drove directly to Wisconsin to visit them in Milwaukee. And on that trip in 1953, I remember distinctly going to Gruberg's Playland on the boardwalk. And that's my first memory of the boardwalk. And I was 5 or 6 years old at the time. So this is a great picture. Showing a little bit more of Wisconsin Street and changed times.
Yes. That's incredible to have survived so much, right?
Right. Thank God I wouldn't be here.
Absolutely.
This is a paean to all my nieces and nephews and all the Long Beach family. This is 5 future lifeguards. Kevin, Liam, Kara, Connor, and Eileen Carey. They live on West Hudson, or they did. 3 of them own houses in Long Beach now, separate from their parents, Tom and Anne-Marie. They sent out these pictures every Christmas from the Washington Rocks, Washington Jetty. And, my sister Virginia lives on Nevada, and Irene and Tommy live on West Hudson. So the family footprint continues through the Hurleys, the McCarthys, and now the Careys, and a whole other generation. In fact, there are some of my mother's great-grandchildren who are now coming to this house and enjoying the beach.
As they should, right? So it's not for your mom and your dad and your great aunt have left a legacy for you guys to carry on.
Absolutely.
And this is our last photo. This was a 1947 shot. I cropped it a little bit just so you could see. When you look at the earlier one, when you're looking down Beach Street, of course, to your right of your house, I think your house was on the end. There was nothing after that. They probably built them a little bit afterward. So in the 20s, am I right?
Absolutely. It was one of the first houses on Wisconsin Street. And, which really didn't get developed until the 20s. You may know better or as well as I do that the narrow streets supposedly were going to be the back entrances to the more of the Reynolds type of villas that were going to expand from the wide avenues to the smaller streets on 3 or 4 lots. Right. But with World War I, and some, financial setbacks to the Reynolds, machine.
Mhm.
They started doing building and bringing the Bosserts and the California houses and the floating houses, Camp Yaphank, the whole Camp Upton and Yaphank. The rest is history.
Yes, that's our movie theater came from Camp Upton, the West End. So
Right.
that's the one that burnt down.
Yeah.
So I just want to tell you thank you, but we have just a couple of questions. So I'm going to just see what you want to share.
Yeah.
My first question is, tell me one very special thing that you remember about 103 Wisconsin.
When I was a young child, there were no fences in Wisconsin Street, no fences. We just played on the sidewalk, right up to the houses. In fact, there were no fences behind the houses, so we could literally go halfway down the block, at least to the Dooley Groat House behind the houses. And in fact, behind their house, there was a slat out of the fence to Stephen Horowitz's house, which we called the Secret Pass.
Another question would be, what is your greatest memory of you growing up, the time that you spent here, of, when you were small?
Yeah, once again, playing in the streets with games like tag and go hide and go seek. It was an innocent time. We hung out at night. There was no TV. In summer, it was all reruns anyway. And we had the only phone on Wisconsin Street in time into the 50s. I remember people coming to us, and of course, if there was something important, you got a Western Union.
Right. How has Long Beach changed over the years?
Well, I would say that the biggest change is post-Sandy. If I walk down Wisconsin Street, it's hard to recognize the houses, who lived where and when, and it's sort of like a little canyon. And so, so many people were affected by that, and so that's the case. Of course, parking only gets worse in the West End. There are 4 cars for every spot on the narrow streets, and if you don't have a driveway with all the cutouts, the parking has almost disappeared. So it's that's the biggest change.
So it basically is much different from when you started out here as a young child.
Sure, and obviously the difference between when my mom was a child is even more glaring.
What do you miss the most about it, the way it used to be?
What do I miss the most? It's sort of the freedom. I mean, I love Long Beach. I guess I can miss a lot of things, but I love it then. I love it now.
Do you remember any one person or great character that you remember from your, in your times when you were young? Is there anybody that comes to your mind that stands out?
Well, there are a couple of people who do, not particularly famous. I worked as a beachcomber, and Tommy Kiernan, who is the supervisor of the group, was a real life character. And the adults who walk with us on the beach, Phil Donnelly, John Thompson, we called the Hammer. He was a character. He was always kind of prodding us on. Jimmy May, who was a lifeguard forever, was a Golden Glove winner. Is a Long Beach, resident forever. I was always enthralled by Vinnie Michaelis, who used to sing Danny Boy at the lifeguards. He was a captain back in the 50s. And to tell you the truth, my friend Jack Murphy is a great storyteller. Jack taught at the Long Beach schools. He was instrumental in developing what I call the Nike School. And he also owned Pete Reed Realty for a while. So he's, of course, Arthur Von Glahn lived across the street from us for a while on the Bay. I didn't know Phil Kohut, but obviously he's probably the most famous person other than Reynolds.
And to go along with that, can you tell me a great story or a legend about Long Beach that is close to your heart?
Well, there's a couple of things. Oscar Wilde visited here, visited the Long Beach, the great old Long Beach Hotel in 1882, and went to Point Lookout on the Marine Railway, which was there for about 5 years along the beach till it got washed out. The boardwalk was supposed to run all the way to Point Lookout, but I guess the funding ran out for that as part of Reynolds' dream. The interesting story is that there was a woman named Eve Meltzer and cohorts ran drugs for Arnold Rothstein, the famous mobster, by carrier pigeon from a house on West Pine in the Roaring '20s. Those are some of the things, and there's a lot of other stories.
Is there anything that we didn't talk about today that you'd like to add?
Yes, an advertisement. As you can hear, I have a love of Long Beach history, and I've actually written a book about to be published called Silver Strand, the Long Beach Saga. And I hope to have it published by April of 2022, the 100th anniversary of the city of Long Beach, which follows just after our recent 100th anniversary of the Hurley McCarthy Carey presence here. So be on the lookout for that. Hopefully you'll have it in the library, and I'll share it.
Wait. I can't wait. I can't wait. I can't wait. I can't wait to have another great book.
Well, I think it's fun. It's historical fiction, but it's from everybody. The few people I've had look at it who are Long Beach historians feel that it hits the spot, and it's not only educational, but a fun read.
Beautiful. I'm so glad you're doing that. I can't thank you enough again for joining us today at the library's recordings. And I hope to, do this again. Programs at the library are very important. Maintaining our history about Long Beach is important. And you're part of the history, and your family's history is important, because everything that we talk about in our memories helps sustain that. And if it's not written down somewhere and it's not told, it's forgotten. And so this is a challenge for me to try to get people to come and talk and tell us all our stories. And I thank you so much.